welcome folks to Freedom Hub's weekly webinar. We have another wireless radiation presentation today. We've had a couple over the past years on this issue from Theodore Scarrato, an Environmental Health Trust. And today we're going to hear from a radio frequency engineer, Mary Bauer, on a project a lobbying client of mine, the National Health Federation, is promoting, as you see here on the screen, to enforce and mitigate 5G wireless broadband emissions. And if you want to interact with the speaker today after the event, you can go to this website at marketplaceforhealthwealthandfreedom.com. You can see it on the screen, and go to home and click continuing the conversation, and that will connect you with the speaker. And right above that is the webinar option. And if you scroll down that, in a week, you can see upcoming presenters and how to see the landing pages after the fact at YouTube and our other channels to watch them on your favorite Brighteon, Rumble, what have you. And so with that, Jenny, do you want to start sharing your screen and introduce Mary Bauer?
Sure.
So let me stop sharing.
So real quick, I am Jenny DeMarco with Virginians for Safe Technology, and we're a nonpartisan grassroots organization that we formed last year to start educating and informing and advocating for Virginians on the 5G plus rollout and on regulating the wireless technologies that we're all using and exposed to every day. And we're really grateful to be partnering with Charles and the National Health Federation for the national campaign that Charles mentioned to enforce the radiation exposure limits, which is just one of the many things that our radiation expert and former radio frequency engineer, Mary Bauer, will be talking about today. And just briefly, Mary was a federal employee and private contractor in the Department of Defense as a radio frequency engineer for 29 years. So she has since made herself a walking encyclopedia on the topic of all things wireless radiation. And I have no doubt that you're going to learn something here, if not many things here today. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Mary.
Thank you, Jenny, for that introduction. I just want to express how happy I am to be here today because there's some really interesting things that I found out in my last round of research that I would like to hear back on the Q&A session for people who have a piqued interest in this topic. So the next slide here talks about a disclaimer, which I have to say some of the material is could be copyrighted. It's for educational purposes only under the Fair Use Act. We have a lot of topics on the agenda today, and there's actually 2 pages worth, but some of them are kind of similar material. So we're going to go through the purpose of the campaign, how we, what topics we're partnering on, specifically centering around the enforcement of the MPEL, which is the maximum permissible exposure limit for radio frequency radiation from cell phone towers, especially the 5G broadband ones. So we're just going to go through finding out what that little critter called the power density is, what it looks like, and so you can become familiar with why it's important to monitor and enforce it, talking about the 5G frequency bands, and also the ICNIRP organization, which is the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, and the role they play in advising the FCC on these power density limits. They, in combination with the IEEE, are responsible for telling FCC how to regulate. FCC merely enforces it through the recommendations that are made to them, along with, of course, the health advisory part from the FDA. So that's an important piece of this puzzle as we're going through and finding out what we don't know about 5G. Also, what's coming down the pike, what's packed in the tube coming out there for 2021. The main driver for why the TERRA Act of 2021 was created within the Virginians for Safe Technology group, and how it's related to greenhouse gas emissions, power consumption, and also talking about things that we can do to get this MPEL monitored and tracked for the power emissions, because there are other countries that are already doing this. We're going to talk about an example with Israel. We're going to talk about governmental agencies that are forming now, non-governmental organizations that are going to become non-legislative rulemakers. And with that comes the social equity and innovation indices and all the rest there, the Biotechnology Research Act, risk assessments, and the action you can take. This is Virginian for Safe Tech's mission, protecting current and future Virginians' right to safe and responsible technology. Now, these are all the bullets that come into play with the campaign, and they're all enumerated on NHF's website. But what I wanted to point out in the middle there in bold red font is that 5G is the most important health topic of the decade. And I know there are other things that are important too, because we all know about vaccines and how that's affecting our health as well. But these two things probably are like a hand in a glove. They go together. So it's really important to be on top of what's going on with 5G just as much as the vaccines for this year. And with the deployment of 5G and the proliferation of these towers everywhere, there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be impacted, specifically our privacy, no opt-out to these things invading our spaces, property devaluations, you know, when they come up on your corners or your street lights. And our focus right now is having a voice. And unfortunately, with these NGO unelected representatives that are popping up everywhere, it's inevitably going to infringe on our privacy rights and our voices being silenced. So we have to be vigilant of what's going on with these organizations. And Jenny, just go back for a second. That last bullet there, the 5G, you know, this is just my opinion. It's needed more for data mining and surveillance, more than for streaming super fast videos and suburban national defense. And when you see how these equity scores and innovation indices are derived from the data that's collected or extracted, I think that you will agree with me. But as we go in the presentation, you'll see how all this fits together. Go ahead, Jenny. So this is just the components that are involved in the TERRA Act. We don't have a actual copy of what we're proposing, but these are the components of it: tracking, enforcing, and reducing radiation and air. The approach mitigation measures were coming from the environmental aspect, because truthfully, nothing else has worked in 20 years. Not that it won't this year, because I think everybody is hitting it from every angle they possibly can this year just to see what sticks. And there is a direct correlation between the amount of power that's used for these emissions and the level of carbon dioxide greenhouse gases. And the things that you see there in the bottom are the things that you can do at the local level. And specifically, we would love to see the legislatively lowered MPEL go through. There's several lawsuits right now trying to do that. Next slide. So one of the things that we got a lot of questions about is, why doesn't the TERRA Act include also lowering the MPEL? So we wanted to just say, it's not, the TERRA Act of 2021 is not inextricably intertwined with that outcome. And what we can do is do something right now. We don't want it to necessarily be attached to that, because it can happen either before or after, and then be in place to have that metric available when it is changed. So if you read all the font in red, it's kind of like highlights, it pops out. You know, the TERRA Act can help right now to provide metrics on MPEL compliance by removing the FCC honor system of MPEL enforcement that doesn't work. The policy right now is don't ask, don't tell. And the fact of the matter is 5G is an energy hog, and it's allowed to be that way because there's inconsistencies in federal public policies that need to be realigned, and time is up. The National Climate Change Task Force needs to address this, and that was just formed in March. So here's what the MPEL is. It's a number. It seems pretty abstract. You see that where the arrows are there, two different values, one for occupational and the other one at the bottom for general population. This particular view graph is in millimeters per centimeter or milliwatts per centimeter squared. And you see the number 1 there. If it's a frequency of 1.5 gigahertz and higher, and if it's below that, it's a little bit less than that. And you see the CFR 47 CFR 1.1310 E1 is the federal statute that puts that guideline in place. Next slide. Whenever you talk about power density, I just would like it to not be as abstract to people, because it is important to understand where it comes from. You have to have those 4 characteristics. There has to be a power level associated with an emitter, a frequency it operates at. We saw in the other chart above or below that 1.5 gigahertz tells you what that limit's going to be. How far away you are from the emitter, the distance or range X, and then the time. And this is kind of like a fictitious thing, because they say your duration can only be, 30 minutes or less, but we all have continuous, exposure to these things. So that characteristic is pretty meaningless, as far as how this is done. And when we talk about it in the United States, power density is usually in microwatts per centimeter squared. Is a factor of 1,000 times less. So you'll see the number there. Instead of 1 milliwatts per centimeter squared, we typically use the microwatts. So it would be 1,000 microwatts per centimeter squared. And these are the different frequency bands, and they're kind of meaningless, the numbers there, because most people aren't going to remember them. But what you can remember is low, mid, and high. And what we're used to is the low band, where the frequencies are a little bit longer in wavelength. The mid band is what they've kind of been transitioning to in the last 10 years, but now they're even abandoning them and going to the high band, and that's when you get over 6 gigahertz. And you don't hit millimeter wave until about 30 gigahertz, and that's when the studies that are out there on the medical effects are not as common or available. But to get an idea of what this high band is about, I gave 2 examples there at the bottom about the active denial system, which works at 95 gigahertz, and that's used for crowd control. And I don't know if you've ever seen it on TV, what happens when they apply these antennas to a crowd, but it's immediate dispersal, because it actually feels like the skin is on fire. It actually feels like you're being burned. So it's very biologically active. And you might not get that same exact effect depending on how close you are to the emitter. These things are going to be, possibly at your street corner. So you might actually be closer to these emitters than you would be in a crowd, but then you're not going to have 95 gigahertz. Hopefully you're not going to have that, but you could have something as high as 50 or 60. So there's a very good tutorial there. I would highly recommend for anybody who's like a little bit of geek speak. This gentleman from Engadget, it's actually an affiliate of, I believe it's Verizon. He gave a very good 15-minute tutorial on what exactly is 5G. And the bottom line is, he calls it a prototype system. There are no standards. They're trying every which combination of frequency and hardware and AI software. It's basically legacy equipment with new software. So it's a very, very good tutorial. I would highly recommend it. And this is just kind of like a little bit of math here. I don't know how interested anybody is in this, but I thought it would give you an idea of understanding the power situation from the emitter. And your distance is down here, but it's measured from how this ray connects with your phone. So this dispersal pattern here is the affected radiated energy. And these are the things that you need to know: how far away you are from it, where it's located, and your frequency, because that will matter how bioactive it is in your phone. If you have a way to fall back to the 4G frequencies, I don't know if they give you that option in the iPhones now. I would definitely employ that option. And yeah, so now we're going to talk a little bit about ICNIRP, the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. This is just an electromagnetic spectrum, so it shows you, your cell phone and your microwave are over here, and we're really talking about this bandwidth in here. It's a very, very, very small part of the whole electromagnetic spectrum. I just wanted you to see where it fits in with comparison to everything else that's out there emitting a frequency. Next slide. Now this really here is the kicker, and you know, the pink elephant in the room, the large pink elephant. The only adverse health effects that this ICNIRP international organization that runs the show says happens, and this is a 2019 report, is nerve stimulation and heating. And this nerve stimulation is probably, could be, you know, medical guidelines. I mean, that's a pretty high frequency there, but I know the megahertz is more used in the medical application. But heating is the only thing they recognize. And we all know with the lawsuits that are in the hopper right now, there's 11,000 pages of evidence of biological effects in the EHT's lawsuit. So they're very behind the times here, but this is how they stand behind this cloak of denial that anything is going on. They don't recognize or admit into evidence the stuff that is legally being displayed in the courtrooms in Washington, D.C. And they say no evidence of cancer, electro-hypersensitivity, infertility, or other health effects. So that's why I have that comment there, really. So the things that are coming in 5G, specifically this year, being something that's, you know, I'd say like very, very quickly coming to the forefront. You know, the OTARDs, the smart city, Wi-Fi calling. I don't know if anybody on the call here knows what Wi-Fi calling is, but it's basically phone calls through broadband, the same way Skype used to be on the computer, but they have an added feature now of using data capacity, meaning you could push data through along with those calls. You know, it could be a call just to push data. And eventually there will be a consolidation of broadband and cellular service. They say there's a upcoming net neutrality change in laws that may make that happen. I don't know how far down the pike that is, but you know, as all this happens, you know, there's going to be this mass proliferation, and really it's all about surveillance. I had mentioned that in the earlier part. They really want to be able to control society through these equity scores, and businesses through something called an innovation index score, which CIT, and you see there in the blue font, CIT.org, that's their thing. You know, that's what they're going to be doing. This non-legislative group of people that has this state arm actor managerial role of VIPA, which is a new organization that was created for the state. That's going to be their job to do all this. So they have a manufacturing sector, a biotechnology sector, and we'll see this in the organizational chart in a little bit. But you know, the ultimate AI dream is for driverless cars and Internet of Things machine language going back and forth just the way people do. And I think eventually, this is just my opinion, that all this stuff is needed as a foundation for predictive crime, you know, reimagining the law to be more, you know, making people guilty on predictive crime rather than actual doing of crime, and also for the militarization, not only of the space and space weapons, but militarizing civilians as well with this kind of atmosphere. It's kind of like Minority Report. So the main driver for why we wanted to do this TERRA Act, you know, with talking about all the infringements of our rights and our privacy, this was an actual scenario in a smart city in Virginia. Now, there aren't too many of them that are going down, so you could probably guess which county this was. But, you know, I call it, they have what's employed an anywhere, anything goes 5G policy. And I worked 2 years with this county trying to, you know, educate and find out exactly what their position was on anything 5G. And this is what it came down to: no monitoring, no complaint process, no transparency. They will claim they have no jurisdiction for safety issues, no responsibility to monitor or mitigate RFR, even if it's over the MPEL. And the thing is that I would say at least 50% of the equipment on towers is all publicly owned equipment for public safety nets and schools and public administration. A lot of these employees, county employees, have licenses, and per FCC rules, a licensee must maintain their equipment under the MPEL. So they were even denying that they had this responsibility with their equipment through their employees. So they're in direct violation of FCC rules. It's catch me if you can and sue me, otherwise I'm going to tell you everything's okay. That's basically the statement they gave me. So when you look at that in contrast to non-ionizing air pollution being treated very differently than any other air pollutant, you know, telecoms basically are getting a free pass on damaging the environment and health of the communities. And most air pollutants like VOCs and ionizing radiation that we would get from nuclear are prohibited from doing excessive environmental and health damages. So my question is, why exactly are telecoms and local governments exempt from this type of review and taxpayer scrutiny for non-ionizing radiation? Now, who said that was okay? Like, why is it okay? And is it time for that to change? So this slide basically shows you the fact that this impact on climate change and the danger to environment and health is known worldwide. And the people who are activists, they all agree on this. Now, this quote is from an IT engineer who spent 10 years in the industry and then woke up and realized that what he was doing was actually helping, you know, to further destroy the environment by the proliferation of all these data centers and towers and all the other, you know, electronics that go along with this equipment. So he actually was from Belgium, and he wrote to somebody in Sweden who was a child activist. I don't know if anybody's heard of Greta Thunberg. She probably is only in her teens when she started to do this, maybe even younger than that. She lived in Sweden, and somebody in Ireland intercepted the post. And then I read it. So this is the connection, Sweden to Belgium to Ireland to the US, and the rest of the world sees it too. So this is not an unknown problem to the people in the field. They just don't like to talk about it. But if you want to read that letter, it's in this post over here. And this is Greta's, her Facebook video on getting back to nature and kind of realizing what we're doing with all this environmental pollution that we're putting out there. So this is just a slide on all the power consumption requirements of 5G. There's a white paper from Huawei here with the link. You can read that. These statistics are backed up in that report. 3.5 times more fossil fuel-based power for a 5G base station than a 4G. And 51% of all the world energy consumption by 2030, and producing 23% of the greenhouse gas emissions without mitigation. So there's inconsistent policies at the federal level that are allowing these carbon emissions and allowing the energy inefficiencies. And they've actually assigned, not for this, but for everything else, a national climate change task force, and 21 federal agencies are participating in that. It's headed up by the former EPA Administrator, Gina McCarthy. And their goal is specifically to get rid of these misalignments in federal policy, but they are not calling the FCC to task on it. This organization is getting a free pass. I really don't understand how they can look at everybody but this group of people. But you know, that's why we're pushing this TERRA Act, because we want them to be responsible for their contribution to what they're doing to the environment. There are ways to lower the power, there are ways to mitigate the RFR, and they just have to start doing it. So now I'm going to talk about the actual piece parts of this TERRA Act and what is needed to do the enforcement. So one of the things we need is an MPEL national database. And we actually identified the part of the Telecommunications Act that this would go into, Section 344 at 47301. And it would create a public online database. And the EPA would do all the post-construction audits to ensure accuracy. Hotspots would be highlighted on, a map. The RF mapping hopefully would be very similar to how the Israeli country is doing the mapping system. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, sorry, Mary.
Okay, I got unmuted. I'm sorry about that. So I'll just go back to this slide that the TERRA Act would fit into a new section 344 of the 47 USC 301 statute, and it would create this online database, special mapping for problem areas similar to how the Israeli government is doing it for their EPA. It would be similar to how all the other pollutants in the air are done, and there would be training available for government officials, businesses, and schools on how to reduce RFR and improve wireless safety. And it would also be a mandate. It wouldn't be, you know, optional or guidelines or recommended. That's the other part of the act. Next. So there actually, in Israel, there is actually software and hardware available to do this very type of thing. So there could be an adaptation to that software and hardware for our limits here, which are different than over there. And, you know, it's not like this is hard. It's just a matter of getting it done. The Israeli government has been doing it for 10 years. This WaveControl is a company that actually produces the hardware. I don't have the name of the company that does the software. They measure it on the inside and the outside. The inside is done through connecting to computers of the cell tower company's monitoring system, and then they do that and transmit it to the EPA. The outside is actually done by an RFR monitor, and we'll see a picture of that in a minute. And the broadband range on these WaveControl sensors is 3 kilohertz to 60 gigahertz, which is awesome because it would get that upper high bandwidth that we really need to know, although 60 gigahertz is very hard to monitor because it's so easily absorbed in air. But it does have that capability, I guess, if it's very close to the source. And the thing about this kind of system is you can log and probably adjudicate permit violations. Over in Israel, each sensor is given a permit of allowable emissions. So they are able to monitor the problem areas on the outside, and they measure the power through the switches and the computers on the inside. So they have a very good idea of what these systems are doing 24/7. So they have a remote control management system with a wireless interface, a solar powered, you'll see a picture of it, and it's able to do this monitoring. And you can see the solar battery right here. And it just sits, you can go to the next slide. It shows the source tower here, and then how it captures it and then reports it. Next slide. And this shows the location here. And then this item here is one of these dots on the map. And this is their problem area here, because they don't put these everywhere. They are measuring the power at each one of the source points, but these are the problem areas. So it's not every sensor location that actually gets one of these WaveControl monitors. Next. Now the OTARDs, this is like the problem child of 2021. They're not new, but their functionality has changed. And this year specifically, they've changed the reporting requirements for not having to send notice and not having to basically get the local zoning people in to permit them. So this is all the information on the OTARDs. And here, if you do have an OTARD near you, you can challenge it with the FCC. I've provided that information. Next slide. And this shows you the history of what's happened here. This rule is a little bit confusing. I've heard it talked about like 3 or 4 different ways exactly what happened in 2021. I would highly recommend this webinar that's on this website here. It's done by an attorney at law, Best and Krieger. I've watched it once already, and I think I probably would have to use it 2 or 3. I'd have to look at it 2 or 3 more times to get everything they say in there, because it's very well put together. And this is just the legislative history with the FCC orders. If anybody has any interest in that, the web link is up there. Now here we go with VIPE and CIT. This organization was newly created in 2020, and I overlaid this map that was on their website. I've overlaid it with this red font, and it just shows you all the things that they're involved in. And one of their main, I guess, thrusts is this Virginia Catalyst, which is a bioscience technology. And I only say that after doing the research, because when I looked at this at first blush, it really didn't look like anything unusual. You have this board of directors, 11 people, This is VIPA. And then this organization here, which all of these are 501c3s here, except for the cyber initiative thing. That's a consortium of 20 universities outside the state of Virginia as well, by the way. That's all they do is sit there and cyber talk and come up with algorithms to apply to your social equity score, I'm sure. But this group here is really the problem child because they are the managerial arm of VIPA. So they're making all of the substantive decision-making for this board of directors. I think they're one and the same, actually. But this thing here will become very important because when you see these 11 people and you see their duties, you'll see why it becomes important. Next slide. So here is our new non-legislative government that's going to make all our decisions for all those, boxes that you saw that were in red font. Some of them are university people, some of them are venture capitalists, some of them are cyber people. But this dude over here, he's the guy that's going to be responsible for this biotechnology stuff. And you'll see why on the next slide. Okay, so it's actually the slide after this. This is VIPA's job responsibilities, if you will, and it seems pretty, mundane with the exception of this thing here, which also doesn't look like it's anything pretty striking until you see what the translation really means. What does collaborative, consistent, and consolidated mean? Sounds pretty efficient, but let's see what it really means. Next slide. So this is on the application for being able to get grant money from Virginia Catalyst for biotechnology. First of all, you have to be collaborative, which means the state's involved at every level. And you have to be consistent, and that means they're only going to approve products for their associated impacts, regardless of how much they are needed. So is that the only way the state monies can be used? So you have to show profit. They claim it's for need, but it's need and profit. So if something's needed, but it's not profitable, they're not going to do it. Consolidated, no duplication of research. So a corporation doesn't have to have a research facility anymore. They just have to go to a college and say, hey, look, if you take on my project, I'll match your funds. And you can do my work for me. And no, by the way, but you can't keep any of the patents that you create because that's all going to be owned by the state. So the objective is commercialization and to score high in business and technical areas and make sure you have no borders between your universities, no UVA versus Virginia Tech kind of, conflict here. Of course, they're not research universities, but what I'm saying is, to remove these borders between businesses and universities, I think is a high bar. I don't know how exactly they're going to do that. But if you were to apply for a grant, the innovator must do all these things. You're going to be assigned an innovation index. You have to have an industry partner, meaning somebody who has bucks. 2 university research investigators are going to be assigned to your case to know everything you're doing or everything you want them to do, one or the other. It has to be an unmet need for improving human health. And you have to know or be able to estimate the size of that untapped market. That's how they'll get the economic impact score to give you your, their version of what the ROI will be on this project. Next. So this was kind of the big surprise to me. When you go to this act for VIPA, it says the main job of this guy, that's the secretary, the one I pointed on the first line of people on the left, is to implement the provisions of the Virginia Biotechnology Research Act. Now, he may have other duties, but this is his prime directive. And what does that mean? AKA promote GMO research and its regulated introduction into the environment. And Jenny and I read this before we hopped on here today, and it's just some of the wording here. That's why I said it must read. Next slide. These are some of the paragraphs that are in there. I mean, it's 5 pages. And since everybody here is a health advocate, I think it's worth your time. The affected localities of where this GMO research is going to be introduced into the environment, they define a 3-mile radius of the location. So, what are they going to do? Like dump it from the air, dump it into the water? I mean, I couldn't make heads or tails out of what this is. So if anybody has any kind of biological inclination to go through this act and email me and tell me what you think this means. I would love to hear your input on this. But this planned introduction into the environment with this GMO stuff, it's just it's a fascinating read. But that's what this group has a focus on. Like I said, they could be doing other things, and obviously they are, because they're putting up 5G sensors all over the place. On the right hand side of all those people in the organizational chart, you have manufacturing, you have engineering, science. But is it all in support of this, or is it in support of everything? I mean, it's hard to say. I don't know why they had his job description like that to support this Biotechnology Research Act, and not a lot of other stuff described in there. And it may be in there. It's 25 pages long, that VIPA Act. But this is one of the things that fell out of that. Next. So now I'm going to switch gears and go back to the 5G end of it, because these two things are interconnected. Sensors are going to be everywhere monitoring whatever they're putting into the environment, or their crops, or whatever else, fill in the blank. It's all about metrics, big data analytics, because this is how they're going to game puts and calls on all this investment in venture capital. So the Swiss Re assessment had some very interesting tidbits, you know, about the cyber end of this. You read what's in red here. This is the risk. The challenge of defense may lead to political friction, security and national sovereignty concerns, espionage or sabotage could affect international cooperation, potential claims for health impairments may come with a long legacy. So when you look at all that, it's really hard to believe that they think it's all worth it, but that's what Swiss Re is saying. And the link is down here for that article. I pulled this from a 2019 report. And this is just more stuff about, you know, the increased vulnerability, and that, you know, more attack services, the volume of data can be hacked and captured in record time because it's zero latency, meaning there's no lag time. Higher levels of radiation are going to have to be accepted, and in some cases legally adapted. And what FCC does in those cases is they just write waivers. There's no circumstance that they won't grant a waiver for unless you sue them. So the rubber meets the road. Increase in liability claims is already happening this year. We're there. So this was written in 2019. It's 3 years later, 2 years later. And so that's why we feel the TERRA Act is so important to do, because, you know, we're trying to reduce the levels of RFR, radio frequency radiation, that are unnecessary, and at least get the excess off the map. And, you know, if we don't do anything, they'll most certainly just have an unlimited proliferation of these sensors doing, you know, who knows what. But this way, you know, we make them be accountable, and we try to get some transparency, and we're coming in at it from the environmental aspect, because with this GMO stuff, it's really a big TBD what's going on with what they're trying to do. So we hope that you'll take action, because we really need you to send out those letters, try to get a sponsor for our bill, try to become, you know, active and looking into what these organizations, these non-legislative NGOs are doing, and you know, maybe, you know, get involved in the public comment. You can go to that website, cit.org, and look at the public comment for VIPA. I think they meet once every 3 months, sending questions to them. I think that they deserve to have some public interaction at this point. They just opened up. They had an open house May 25th, so this is all really hot off the press. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Excellent, Mary. And in the chat, folks, I just put the National Health Federation link for the sample letter to let you ask your representative and both your senators to introduce this bill to enforce and mitigate radiation emissions from wireless. And folks, it's question time. If you look under the reactions tab, click that, you'll see the raise hand icon. So please raise hands, and let's get some questions going. And I'll start, Mary. If we had an Israeli-like enforcement mechanism, maybe a bit more vigorous, I know you've said that it's a bit limited in scope, and we saw power limits violations and had the automatic mitigation, what would that do to the ability of telecom to use wireless? Would problems occur such that they would have to resort more to fiber optics to get the communications going? Give us the picture of the future if we did have vigorous emissions enforcement.
Yeah, they've actually already gone down that route. They're already into the consolidation phase. So I talked about net neutrality laws, doing this consolidation of broadband and PCS services. And that's part of that because, right now you have a lot of duplication of pathways. And, in order to be power conservative and to not be in the situation that we're in right now, consolidation is an absolute part of this. So in doing the consolidation, they would also consider, how do you reduce your RFR footprint? And that would be, putting in fiber optic where you can. And they have already started doing that in, limiting their Wi-Fi radiation in schools. I believe Daphne was pretty active in doing that, helping with that effort. So, it's a multi-pronged approach. Right now, they're just like a freight train going down the tracks 90 miles an hour and there's no brakes on it. But eventually this has to lead to this end, the consolidation end.
Thank you, Mary. Abigail, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate your deep dive into this and for spending so much of your time on it, educating us. I had a clarification and a question about a source. You said that a merger of broadband and PCS services would come with a revised net neutrality law. I've kind of been sensitized against the idea of net neutrality in the past. That sounds like another reason to oppose it. What does PCS stand for?
Cellular services.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, now you're going to ask me for the source on that, and I
probably... No. The source is just on something completely different. I do health policy, and I'm really curious about a single source that you would recommend about 5G health effects.
I would definitely say Environmental Health Trust. They're about the most comprehensive on that end. I mean, she's been doing public administration on this the 5G wireless thing for years, but she's had other topics that she successfully has mitigated, in the early part of her career. So I always point to her, Deborah Davis.
Awesome.
Theodora.
Yeah.
Thanks. Paul G., your hand is up.
Hi, thank you very much. I just have a couple of specific questions, and I want to point out something that we found last night. There's an interim final rule now by the Treasury Department, and they are actually getting realistic about upload and download needing to be symmetric. So they say, quote, under the final interim rule, eligible projects are expected to be designed to deliver upon project completion service that reliably meets or exceeds symmetrical upload and download speeds of 100 megabits per second. That's very different than what broadband standards have been for many years. So this is a good thing for everybody. And the important point here is wireless has a very difficult time doing this. This looks like this is only going to be handled by our great fiber optic infrastructure, which we've been paying for from our phone bills for the last 25 years. And the biggest problem we've got is there's been a big heist of those funds and misappropriated by the wireless industry to build out the 4G network. We can go back and claim those funds in order to re-enable the state public telecommunication utilities to finish the broadband fiber optic infrastructure. That's the part that people seem to be missing, and a just really important part of it. And a guy named Bruce Kushnick has been writing about this for 20 years, and he's pretty much on the hot trail here. And that's how we solve a lot of these problems. So this is at least one thing I wanted to point out. And I want to go back to the OTARD rule because I had a specific question. When they wrote those final rules, they made a very careful distinction between information services and telecommunications services, and said that no one would have protection from these rules if they offered commingled services. And this whole commingle thing is pretty much just a groupthink thing. I don't see anywhere where it's established in the laws, because we have personal wireless service facilities and services set up by the 1996 DCA, which specifically means wireless phone calls. All this wireless broadband stuff, there is no preemption for it by law.
Yeah, there's an overreach on that. That's all. So what's happening is right now, I believe OTARDs possibly could be limited to broadband only, as far as these new rules go for 2021, the siting and all that. But when this consolidation thing happens, there won't be, there'll be no wall between the two services. So it's kind of like an up and coming, it's going to all merge anyway kind of thing. And whatever limitations they have now are probably going to, disappear.
When you say this consolidation thing, unfortunately, I jumped into slide 19. Are you saying earlier on you were talking about some federal law that's going to change that?
The way I understand it is net neutrality is going to be rewritten. Now, I'm not a person who is very knowledgeable about that. I'm just quoting what was in the, the source that said, and I had heard this a long time ago, that, there's going to be a consolidation in the infrastructure. But, when you talk about those upload and download speeds, yeah, you wouldn't be able to get that by any kind of wireless at all. So it might be, the Treasury Department's way of trying to control FCC through the budget. And, you always follow the money with FCC, right? But, they seem to be independent of any kind of or any kind of legal consequence of things that they do incorrectly. So, when you talked about the $2 billion per state that, Virginia should be getting back, they didn't care that there was all this misappropriation and cross subsidization and people were getting ripped off, and they claimed to not know anything about it and that the states had total reign to do what they wanted. They weren't holding their hands, blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of like, really? Because they all point to each other. Like, the states point to FCC and FCC points back to the state to absolve each other of any kind of liability invoked by doing something incorrectly for as long as they've done it. And this is what they're doing with this MPEL thing. The state's saying, oh, FCC is trying to enforce it. And if you read the CFR, the 47 CFR 1.1310, it's very clear that they say the property owner, meaning the tower person who owns the tower that's on the land, or the person who owns the land, one or the other, or both of them, are responsible for making sure the MPEL is not violated. So they point to each other, and in the meantime, they do nothing. And the only way you get them to do anything is to sue them, like they did up in New York, with the lawsuit that you mentioned. And we had actually thought of, writing a letter. We had actually drafted it last November to send to the Attorney General to say, we want a forensic audit. Where'd this money go? They have to find out how much rental fees they should have gotten charged. But unfortunately, with the Attorney General that's in there right now, that's head of all the Commonwealth attorneys in the state, they all got the same memo. I don't know who put it out. I don't know if it was above this Attorney General's head or where it came from, but basically it's like, don't say anything, don't ask, don't tell. And basically, talk about the digital divide, and sayonara, see you later. So, you're not going
okay. So I understand what you're saying, that your state government is kind of in cahoots with the federal to try to gloss over a whole bunch of stuff to get some stuff done. However, we're getting rolled right here in America, and you don't have to go along with most of this if you want to get in the middle of it. And so the whole point is, you do have the ability to approach your Public Utilities Commission and get them to change these accounting procedures. They don't have to continue to allow these cross subsidies. There was a DC Circuit ruling in March 2020, a regulators versus the FCC, which made that very clear. Each state can make their own decision.
Yeah, and maybe that would be the better choice to approach. I was looking at it from a consumer advocate perspective, where the Attorney General would step in under that hat. But maybe the more effective one would be, just like you said, going in as a utility consumer and saying, I want a refund. It's probably a much more effective way of doing that, because
in fact, that's already happening in California. So I can encourage other states to kind of do the same. Once you actually make these wireless companies pay their fair share for the use of the fiber backbone, then this whole 4G, 5G rollout is no longer profitable. And this is the biggest problem, is they're basically trying to take ownership of a public asset and claiming it for themselves. You can stop them right there.
Yeah, except for the one problem that you have is what part does national defense play in this game? And I don't know the answer to that question, other than like what I said, Minority Report and predictive crime and, whatever else they want to have. I mean, 5G groups are considered inflammatory and a threat. So, where does it go from there?
Well, so then my strong encouragement to everybody here is two things. Number one, do not call yourself an activist, call yourself an advocate. That's a little bit safer. Number two, stop with the branding for no 5G, stop 5G, and do something that is a positive direction. We have branding for wireamerica.org and wirecalifornia.org and unsafeatneg.com. We pick our names carefully so that we're not really seen in those lights.
Yeah,
Very good.
Yeah,
Now-
I think other groups may have had more counsel and still had them showing up at events and sending emails to them. I just think that if they feel too much, that's all that matters to them. I don't think that branding, I mean, I do think branding is a first tier, protection, but it's also the message that you carry. So if you want to educate people and you're saying, oh, you should do wired over wireless, and they have CIT sitting there next to the government complex trying to give out wireless contracts for anything and everything. I mean, the things that they're monitoring, an example, they want to put sensors in trash cans to find out whether or not they should pick up your trash as the trash truck is going down the street. And this is not only a model that they have used in my county. This is what they're using. This is the playbook internationally. This is the thing they're telling them to give as an example as to how these sensors are going to make your life more convenient. Now my thing, I'm just going to call them on it and say that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, because if the trash truck is coming down my street and is not going to pick up my trash can that has trash in it because it's only half full instead of totally full, and I'm going to have putrefied trash on my curb for a week, I mean, that's advanced technology doing something beneficial and convenient for society. I mean, I think it's just a cover story, but this is what they're telling everybody why they need these sensors. This is what CIT is actually giving money, taxpayers' money, out to people to develop sensors to put on trash cans.
So Mary, we have other questions. Chuck, you have your hand up.
Yes, hi. I think it's all interesting. It sounds like a lot of technical and political talk, though. I don't know whether it's going to resonate with the average person. I have this threat in our community, and I'm going to be approaching it from a medical point of view. And so I would like to find out what the average person's exposure is to electromagnetic radiation. I'd like to find out how much the 5G is going to increase that. I'd like to get some relative figures of how much it impacts it at 500 feet, 1,000 feet, and 1,500 feet. I'd like to see what the measurements are for the damage. I know that there's one DNA damage measure, 80HGD. And so there could actually be some control studies to find out how sick people are, how much DNA damage they have now, and then determine through the analysis I'm talking about how much additional radiation there will be and what the cost of that will be based on their existing health status. And also you could add in the whole children's factor.
Well, yeah, the unfortunate thing about that is cause and effect relationships. And, is there just a high correlation, or is there actually a proof? And
that's what I specialize in that. I've written 3 books on performance measurement. So I know how to establish a baseline.
Yeah, that's probably, you would need some science there, because what they'll say, as you saw in the ICNIRP slide, is that, oh, well, that person was sick, before that thing, got up there. And so how can you say it's that doing that to that person?
It's not impossible to do this. And I think this is where the information will resonate with the average person.
Oh, yeah, sure.
But I need to know, what is the average, what is the acceptable average limit for electromagnetic radiation? I haven't seen that anywhere. And then if you get all the right people in the room and you use a very common 6-point problem solving process, we could end up with a strategy that's holistic and based on science and based on the input of everybody that has expertise in this matter. Right now, we're having a talk and people have questions, and we send ideas for legislation, but we're really not doing holistic problem solving with the right information. So we're only going to get part of the answers. We're not getting the best solutions because we're not doing the right process and we're not using the right information. And this
Hey,
is
Jeff.
something that I've been doing for 30 years, so I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so
Hey, there's actually a really good accessible. You guys know Cowan, Tom Cowan, co-wrote a book last year, very quickly in the uptick wake of the numbers, or what looked like the numbers, called The Contagion Myth. It's actually a pretty easy read. He talks about telomere degradation rates. He talks about there is no acceptable limit. There is no such thing as an acceptable limit because we've never been there. But there are hundreds of studies of DNA mutation. They're very accessible. It's a deep. You know, he's been doing this for decades, and I think it's a good first point. It's a good tip of the iceberg book if you're looking for something that's very user friendly and mass readable for the layman.
Thank you, Tom.
Sure.
Let's see, Kelly, I think you wanted to ask a question from chat. You want to unmute yourself? And Kelly, if you're not there, Nancy, you want to ask a question?
Yes, thank you. Hi, Mary.
Speak up, Nancy.
Hi, Mary.
hi.
I am EMS disabled, and I work on this issue pretty much full time now as an advocate for public and environmental health and EMS disabled rights. And one of the things that I think people should be considering here is with this not only health, but using EMS disabled rights in terms of all of this proliferation. When you talk about garbage cans having sensors and all of this stuff. So anybody who is disabled should be making accommodation requests. And we have got to have more visibility and be recognized for our rights. Right now, 1/3 of the population is being made sick and 6% are already disabled. And we're not voicing our rights about this. And so I have a few things, a very interesting discussion going on. One of the things is you said that there is a way to challenge this OTARD with the FCC.
Yeah, it's really a splitting of a hair, and I'll give you an example. So if a person puts a OTARD on overhanging patio, that's not considered his property because I guess it projects onto maybe part of the land that would not be totally his property. So they could say, oh, well, you're not cited in you know, it's a common access area. So, you know, you might not be able to have that there. It's like contesting to the letter of the law whether or not the owner or the person who is getting the OTARD has sole access to that property that the thing is put on, and if it overhangs over to somebody else's property. So if the patio overhang, you know, goes over a common walk area, that, you know, that might void it, or, you know, if it's strictly not his use, that might void it. It's splitting a hair. But one thing I wanted to tell you, Nancy, is, you know, as far as the EHS thing, I am also EHS, and I participate in hearings all over the United States, and I hear what these people say when the ADA claim is brought up. And, you know, the township and the council for the township and the applicant all say the same thing. They point to that, you know, FCC rule that says no health considerations can be taken into account. And what we have here is the battling of two federal laws, and one does not preempt the other. In other words, FCC's federal laws are no stronger than the ADA federal laws, but they have already put the propaganda out there. These people don't know how to interpret, you know, the claims that are made. And one by one, I see them decide against the ADA claim.
This is the distinction we have to make, that we are not making health claims. These are disability rights, and the section 255 of the TCA explicitly says it does not preempt the ADA, and which includes the Fair Housing Act rights. So we have to educate our officials on this. And
Well, I saw somebody do that. I mean, they had a citation from a law case that was very explicit, and they just blew it off. I just call them all kangaroo courts. I mean, all this stuff. I mean, all this
case going on now with my state. So I'm hoping that my state Civil Rights Division will back me up, so I'm no longer an EMS prisoner.
Yeah, I totally support everything that's been said here from the technical perspective. I've just never seen it stick. What I'm saying is, you know, I know you're all right, but I'm just saying I've never seen it stick. So I'm just trying something totally from a different perspective, because this is their speak. You know, this.
I understand that, but we just have to continue to educate and to pursue our rights and not be silenced by them.
Thank you all. We have run out of time. So this is Charlie Fromm, and the co-host, Jeff Canner, again, couldn't make today. You're looking at the screen, national-health-federation.rallycongress.net. And there, if you click that on your own time and send an email to your members of Congress, we do hope that you will do that and encourage others to educate them about the importance of enforcing these emission limits as an indirect way to put some barrier in the deployment of these antennas outside our bedrooms or our kids' classrooms, by our offices. And Mary, do you want to tell folks how they can reach you and Jenny?
Yeah, you can definitely go to our website, virginiansforsafetech.org, and we have a email, virginiansforsafetech. Jenny, what is the email address for the group? Yeah,
Virginians for Safe Tech at protonmail.
Yeah, Proton Mail. I was going to say
.com.
Gmail.
I know.
So, I knew I wasn't going to get it right. Yeah, so you can send us an email there. I'd love to have questions and feedback. I really appreciate all the technical comments, and I just want to let you know I totally agree that there should be a better way, but I haven't seen it work in 20 years. So if anybody has any other ideas that we can try, I like the idea about the State Corporation Commission and going for the $2 billion from there, because I think that actually would be more effective. You know, and maybe it's from the flank area that we get this thing going. And everybody in different states, you know, tries to do the same thing. Maybe we'll break the piggy bank.